I am Daniel Minty, a cognitive behavioral therapist, teacher, and writer. In his textbook, Doing Psychotherapy, Franz Michael Bosch writes, when we're bored with a patient, it's not the content of the session that's usually responsible. The loss of emotional contact with the patient is what causes us to feel estranged. When a patient emotionally withdraws, though he may be talking right along, the tone and inflection that carry the message that he's speaking to us and not to a wall are missing. Then, quite unconsciously, we respond by feeling alone, isolated, meaningless, in a word, unloved. Before we realize it, we in turn withdraw from the patient, though we continue to look attentive and even pretend to be interested. Such disruptions in our therapeutic alliance are among the most painful moments in psychotherapy for patient and therapist alike. I recently chatted with my All Things CBT colleague, Heather Clague MD, about the ways in which both parties contribute to such disconnection and what we as therapists can do to address it. This will also be the content of a 6-week online course we'll be teaching together at the Feeling Good Institute, beginning Thursday, October 21st at 9 a.m. US Pacific Time. Heather and I invite you to sit in now on our consideration of this essential topic and to join us next month for our 6-week class. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to again co-teach with you and sit with our colleagues and look at the Therapeutic Alliance and ways in which therapists and patients co-create a disconnect with each other that gets in the way of the work. And thinking about my own experience in that direction, I was remembering a patient that I had worked with, this was years ago. And this fellow was a psychologist, I think very good at what he did, a lot of self-awareness, and really liked him. Just felt like we were peas in a pod or something. And he was quite depressed, somewhat suicidal. He had made a commitment to live out his natural life, but was one of the most depressed people that I had experienced in an outpatient setting. And so we got into this race to the bottom on the homework front, where I assigned him about what I would assign people who were that depressed. And he dropped the ball and did maybe 10% of the homework. And so I decided, okay, well, let's lower the bar. And instead of asking you in your overwhelmed state to do 30 minutes of written homework a day, we'll ask you to do 15 minutes. And he said, oh, that sounds better. Let's do that. Well, then again, he dropped the ball. And a part of me was just curious, could we find a threshold that he could get over? Could we find us a number of minutes of psychotherapy homework a day that he would be able and willing to do? And then from that starting point, could we build therapy and a correct dosage of homework that would actually help him no longer be depressed? To make a painfully long story short, we couldn't. And he did less and less, and we both became more and more dispirited about the work together, and finally decided to part company. Realized what we were doing was not helping him, and so we decided not to do that and referred him to a couple of places that wouldn't ask patients to do homework. So I think what we did was we co-created a situation in which it was unlikely that he was going to get better. And he had a role in that. I had a role in that. And when I make those kinds of errors, particularly therapy terminating errors, I think I contributed to something that basically led the therapy to fail. I like to then see what did I learn there?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've learned is that if I have an initial sense of the dosage on the homework front that would actually be required to do the response, I might be willing to modify that slightly to see if I can help someone get behaviorally activated. But it would probably be an error on my part to dial that down more than maybe 10%.
Mm-hmm.
And then if I take it down 10% and the person's still not following through, there's a moment of clarity that I've since had with other patients where we agree then we're not going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of drawing this out for weeks or months afterwards, it's kind of a slow death of the therapy. Let's have a sharp break. And in our alliance resistance class, we talk a bit about how we do that, set up gentle ultimatums that are win-wins.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the patient chooses, he's a winner when he walks out the door. And that would seed a possibility for something going forward that this other approach just does not offer.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing we call alliance resistance is real. It's actionable. When we make these errors, we can learn from them. And I'm looking forward to our learning together here when we launch our next 6-week series of classes next month.
Mm-hmm. I love that story, Daniel. And it sounds like you're saying the error you made was in being too flexible, too patient, too accommodating, instead of kind of holding on to what you knew to be necessary for the treatment to be successful. And that clarity then set him free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm curious, did you ever get any follow-up from him, or did he ever? No.
Never did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think we stand to learn so much from therapies that aren't going well, both in terms of our own practice, but also within the treatment itself, right? These can be these kind of golden moments where corners get turned. I'm thinking of, and you've taught me to be kind of very appreciative of my own negative emotion in treatments. Like if I'm feeling irritated or annoyed or upset, like that's probably a golden opportunity. And I was working with a patient who's been making slow, steady progress on relationship work, wanting a closer relationship with his wife. And it's as common when relationship work, there's a fair amount of falling back into blame. But he'd really made strides. And he came in one day and he was just back in blame and portraying himself as the victim and recruiting me to, be on board with this idea that his wife was a monster. And I got really mad at him. And, I was aware that I was angry and I was starting to interrupt him. And, I really like this guy and I care about him a lot. So it wasn't too hard to kind of own that and point that out to him and kind of lovingly grab him by the lapels. And he was quite shocked because it had been a divergence from the more patient approach that I've been taking. And it really, he really loved it. I mean, I was able to kind of process with him what it was like for him that I got kind of impatient with him. And of course, he identified it was a similar dynamic with his wife. And he became quite curious and interested and really shifted, became much better able to identify when he was falling into the victim role and kind of recruiting other people to see him as a poor, innocent soul. And if I had not been willing to be okay with being annoyed and angry at him, I think we could have continued in a direction that would not have been helpful, that would not have been fruitful to him.
Thinking of an image from the Zen literature, a teacher holds a sword that kills and gives life. Sword has two edges. And I think the killing part of the sword is cutting off delusive thinking. And it's that cutting off our limited thoughts about reality that gives life to a larger reality. And maybe in that moment of taking him by the lapels, you were showing him that sword. And he recognized that this wasn't mean-spirited or self-aggrandizing on your part. You were asking him to wake up to something that he was not paying attention to, and that was life-giving for him and moved the therapy forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have I think both these stories are saying the danger of being too nice as therapists, right? Too compassionate, too patient. We are not serving our patients well if we kind of suppress some of the more, the more painful, harder aspects of this work that we do. It's very challenging work. And if someone is not willing to show up and do that work, then we can't make that therapy work without that partnership with them. And we then engage in alliance resistance if we try to pretend that we can do that.
Mm-hmm. What would be some thoughts that would tempt us to keep that sword sheathed, to not come forward with a fierce love for our patient, but to stay on the more namby-pamby love side of things?
Well, I'm going to abandon my patients. I'm going to hurt my patients if I talk straight. It'd be one that comes up a fair amount for me. There are also the more grandiose one, right? That like, well, I'm better than anything else he's going to find, right? Like no one else would do a better job than me. I'm special, or it's all up to me. Sort of thoughts in that direction.
Yeah, it sounds like for you, Heather, that would be a grandiose thought.
Thank you, Daniel. I mean, the other thing is, you mentioned you like this guy, right? We enjoy our patients. We like them, even when they're suicidally depressed. They can be charming and wonderful and lovely people to hang out with. And so we have to accept the loss of the relationship, right? That this is point of this relationship is to help someone grow. And if that's not happening, it can be painful to say goodbye.
We were consulting on a case in our All Things CBT program earlier today, and one of our colleagues had a thought that, well, I'll change the content, but see, assigning more homework, that would be my agenda, not the patient's agenda. So it would be an agenda setting error to set limits or to require certain kind of compliance. And that would degrade the therapeutic alliance and the chance of helping someone. So that would be another kind of thought that team CBT therapists might have. I must follow my patient's lead. I should never ask them to follow mine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, because it can feel scary to take a leadership role, right? Our patients might reject us. They might protest. We might not want to put ourselves in conflict with a patient. It can feel scary.
So one reason we might get into over niceness would be to avoid conflict.
And then just to keep it messy, I mean, I think there is some therapeutic idealism that is not always unhealthy. I mean, I can say I've had a few longer term patients where there were times where I worried that I was enabling something, and patients paid off. and they did, being willing to tolerate some periods of not doing homework actually did pay off. We were able to have that be the focus of our work together, work through it, and there were shifts and changes. So maybe uncertainty tolerance is a part of this, right? We can not always know if we're making the right decision, whether we decide to be firm with the ultimatum or to keep going. We don't always have the answer.
Are you saying that being apprised of our own negative thoughts would be important? We may say this therapy is not going quickly enough or well enough, and we may be shooting on the work or on the patient, when in reality, there's something happening that's important and developmental. And if we're willing to hang in there, pay our attention to the patient, not our thoughts, doors may open that otherwise we would close unilaterally.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think the presence of that is another thing that makes this hard, because just because that's sometimes true doesn't mean it's always true. And so I think there's moments where we decide to set a gentle ultimatum can be quite painful and filled with uncertainty, and doesn't mean that it's not a profitable direction to go ahead and set a limit, even if continuing to work might be profitable. I think that's where maybe listening to ourselves, is this work I want to continue with someone? Is this, is the stuckness here something that I'm motivated to continue to work on? Because it might be okay to end a therapy because we don't really feel like continuing in this pattern, right? Being true to ourselves, and someone could find someone who is more patient and willing to do that work with them.
I've noticed that timing is another important piece here. I've had experience of working with someone and not much change happening, and the therapy ending, and then sometime later the person returning. And thinking of one of these patients who actually said to me, I wasn't really ready to work with you last time. This and this and this have happened. Now I am. And I believed her, and we did tremendous work together on our round 2. So when I issue a gentle ultimatum and someone decides to not work with me right now, I always make it clear that if something shifts for them, that I'd be highly interested in reconnecting and hearing what that is, by way of planting that seed, that because this work isn't going to move forward, that doesn't mean that the work itself wouldn't, or that you and I couldn't move things forward together when circumstances are somewhat different.
I love that, Daniel. It's really standing ground for you've talked about laying a floor on the work, like setting the work up for success by laying some groundwork, and being clear that you wouldn't want to continue on the shaky foundation, but if the patient is able to show up again to do their part, that then you'd welcome that and things could go forward when that framework, that foundation is in place.
What would you say to someone who might be considering joining us for our series here next month, but isn't quite sure if this is for them? What might you say?
It's going to be great if you're willing to show up and do homework. Yeah, I think it's going to be I'm really excited about the class. We've taught it together for several years now, and we keep tweaking it, and I'm excited about the tweaks of this iteration. And I'm hoping we're going to have some modest didactic portion. We're going to have skills practice and an opportunity for case consultation, because I think the best learning happens right there in the present moment. Yeah, it's going to be a class with potentially with vulnerability, because we'll be talking about cases that aren't going so well, right? Bringing the struggles that we've gotten into. So I'm looking forward to setting up a group that is kind of warmly supportive and encouraging each other as we get vulnerable with each other and learn and practice skills to help kind of understand how a case may got off track and hopefully use that as the gold to get it back on track or let it go, as some of the examples we're talking about today.
Thinking back on some of the feedback we received after our last class, and it seemed like these were points that people most appreciated. A safe setting where they could talk about the stuckness that they've experienced, get some support, empathy, practice in addressing these moments in therapy that seem to come up for all of us. And it seems that if we're willing to check our egos at the door and just show up as curious people interested in stepping up our game and addressing what might be one of the most painful sectors of the work that we do, where someone who's suffering comes to us, asks for help, and then we realize we're not helping them. And maybe we're both feeling annoyed, frustrated, disappointed, hopeless, not liking each other very much. That's probably the most painful scenario that I experience in my clinical work. And to feel that we have some resources to bring to that dynamic that can offer something more authentic, life-giving, and healing is pretty exciting. And I'm thrilled that we're going to be doing take 4, or is this our 4th year of doing this or something? Yeah. We fail forward together and learn a little bit more each time. But if that sounded like something that folks were interested in, we'd love to have you with us and see what we can see during our time together.
Right on.
All right. Well, thanks, Heather, for being my co-teacher, and learned tremendous amount from you each time we teach together. One of the joys for me, and that's true of our colleagues I sit with too. We each have our own wisdom that we can bring to these moments, and so can't wait to sit down in class 1 next month.